Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Pagan's Witchy Corner. My name is Pagan, and today I am joined by a very dear friend, and that is Laurelei Black. Laurelei is the author of quite a few amazing books, many of them focusing around Aphrodite, and lots of wonderful things. We're going to talk a lot about that. But Laurelei, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Pagan, for having me.
You have a lot of really great books. Like I said, a lot of them focusing around Aphrodite, which was really interesting how it kind of came into being that right around the time that I booked you, my writing partner and he and I were writing a fiction book that had Aphrodite just kind of mentioned in it because it's a Greek mythos romance. And I don't work with Aphrodite at all. And I looked up, I was like, well, if I'm going to put her in the book, I'm going to make sure that her offering, at least as mentioned, is correct. And so I looked it up and all that stuff. And then as we're getting ready to go to publishing, it's like, you need to also thank her for this book or your book will not sell. And I'm like,
Oh,
yes, ma'am. I don't know where that came from, but I can do that. I'm not going to argue. Um,
she's looking out for me. That's
Right.
awesome.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I put a beautiful thank you to Aphrodite in there and a tribute to her. And lo and behold, the book started selling as soon as it launched. And I was like,
Yeah.
well, okay, thank you. We don't work together, but I appreciate you.
She's great at helping with self-promotion and just sort of like everything you think of as those sweetening spell type works,
hmm
drawing people toward you. She's fantastic at all that. So she's a good person to have on your side.
She is. And it was funny because when we had the cover designed, because it's a monster romance and um having like a satyr fawn type creature on the cover was just going to be impossible. We couldn't even begin to do that. And so I was like, let's go with like roses and flowers and lilies and stuff like that. Turns out one of her offerings is roses and I was like, "Huh, I didn't know that." When I pitched the cover designer that, "Hmm, that's interesting." And everybody has ate up the cover as well. So I'm just like, huh. Well, apparently you stuck your little fingers in this story and we're like, yeah, I'm gonna play in this too. That like that's kind of what she
Yeah.
did, and I loved it so much. But it was really interesting that at the same time that happened was also when I booked you on the show. So
Oh,
like it
wow.
was just kismet all the way across.
That's amazing.
So, what kind of made you, when you first started writing about Aphrodite and obviously the different various things that you have written, because you've written a lot in various different genres, because you also have the Liber Queen, and I'm probably butchering
Kane.
that. Okay.
Liber Kane.
Which I would assume is a little on the darker side of things, which we can totally talk about. But, Aphrodite seems kind of the polar opposite of that. How did you kind of go from one side of the fence to the other?
Yeah, that's been an interesting, I won't even call it a tension in my craft, but it's been an interesting juxtaposition of sort of the forces at play within what ultimately is my witchcraft and my spirituality. So I really first got involved with paganism and polytheism and magic through witchcraft and the witchcraft tradition that I was a part of initially and still am now, although it's a different tradition. It's sort of morphed and become something new. But I've always practiced traditional witchcraft, sort of. If you think about books by authors like Gemma Gary and Shawnee Oates and Keldon, Nigel Pearson, these are my people, right? These are the waters that I swim in, which tends to be a little bit darker on the witchcraft side than than some other versions of
Mm-hmm.
craft. I consider it very balanced. There's a lot of like within my own witchcraft practice. There's sort of three central figures that are archetypally referred to as the black goddess, the white goddess, and the red god. That red god being manifested as Cain, who I write about in Liber Qayin. But really, if you look at that work, it sort of tells a whole story, but it's the white goddess that does a lot of the storytelling within it. We get more information about sort of the mythos from her. And there's always this balance between the dark and the light and sort of the red thread that connects them. Um, so it wasn't it's not odd for me that Aphrodite is so prominent within my work. Within my first year of study, it started being very obvious that she was showing up,
Hmm.
sort of in those ritual magic settings. You know, you already explained. She starts to like tap on your door and just whisper messages through the
Right.
through whatever crack you've left open. But then before you know it, she's sitting on the living room couch and there's this whole sort of just a presence that she fills up in your life. She's a very present goddess. I feel like there's a lot of myths within Greek mythology and legend
Hmm.
about Aphrodite, more than many of the other gods, really being manifest and being with people. She has love affairs with humans. She has, half human, half deity, how whatever we want to envision that as being. Um, Children. She's very invested in humanity. She's very, very invested in our creativity and our abundance and these things that we don't necessarily think of as love, but that are love. They're expressions of love, or manifestations of love. So she's just, um, yeah, she has a this interesting way of just sort of coming in and gracefully taking up space in your life. She's not really demanding, I haven't found, but she is persistent, like water. you know, so she'll just kind of keep tapping at you until you're like, yeah, I think I'm ready for this. I have not really ever felt forced into anything, that she's wanted me to do. It's just been sometimes there's that. This isn't the right time for me. I'm not sure of my own ability to do that. And she just kind of keeps persisting until you're ready. Um, which is an interesting thing about. I'm going to just mention you
Hmm.
said that your book cover has roses and lilies.
Yes.
Lilies are actually associated with her very anciently as well.
Really? I could
Ah,
When I looked up the offerings, roses was one of the first things that come up, but lilies did not. So,
yeah.
we have the on the cover it's the beautiful like calla lilies, and then there's
Hmm.
also I think that the flower that I sent for reference to the cover designer was a nightborn lily, which is like a black and
Oh,
red lily,
yeah.
and just absolutely stunning. And she definitely made her presence kind of known within that book because she was the overall deity that was blessing the union between the two main characters, and
Nice.
uh you know kind of showing that even though you may look monstrous, you may not actually be the monster of the story, which is the whole premise of the story. But she did such a
Right.
beautiful job kind of instigating that as well, and kind of blessing the union and blessing who they were as characters. So it was only appropriate that she got mentioned in the beginning of the book as a thank you. And I had thought about doing it before I kind of got that nudge, and I was like, yeah, I don't know if I should do this because it's like a fiction book. Should I? Like, am I gonna like scare people away with this? And then it's like, no, you need to do this, and I'm like, oh, okay. But I've also found with a lot of the other Hellenic deities, because I work with Hades and Persephone as well.
Hmm.
More Hades than Persephone, but he was a lot like that. He was just very kind of like nudge, nudge, nudge.
Hmm.
And then one day he's like, "Hey, you're reading a book about me. I'm going to sit here and talk to you the whole time you're reading this book about me." And I'm like, "Don't you have something else to be doing?" Like, no. And then he would kind of give those bits of insight, like, hey, you remember this thing that happened? Well, this is why it happened, and it would be highlighted within the book. And I'm like, oh, 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 well, that explains so much.
Right.
So saying something similar along Aphrodite, that's really kind of a cool correlation, that even though different deities still respond similarly. So that's really cool.
That is very cool. Yeah, that is very cool. One of the books that I've written is actually fiction. It's a novel called The Temple of Love. The premise of it is that it follows the life of Sappho,
Hmm.
basically. And in the book, I've envisioned her life as that of a priestess of Aphrodite. And some of her most famous works, especially the more complete fragments that we have of hers, um, are hymns to Aphrodite. They're prayers to Aphrodite. So she definitely had a close relationship with that deity, um, and um, it is exactly like you described. Aphrodite just kind of went, "Oh, we're writing about me now. Here, I have some things to say." You know?
I mean, that is very true. That was very kind of how it went, especially when writing, because I was like, well, I was like, maybe we should do something like this because it is Greece. They would be very much involved with the gods. The gods would be very much kind of involved with everything. And obviously, these various creatures would be there. So it was just a really fun experience to write that. And I usually don't write within the Greek mythos. So I was like, huh, well, this is going to turn out really well or really terrible. One of the two turned out really well. But it was just a really fun thing. And I think that it's cool how deities kind of do that, especially like I was saying, a lot of the Hellenic deities do that. They really like to instigate, hey, do this thing. You're going to like it if you do this thing. And it's just a really fun experience to see how that kind of comes into being. Um, Obviously Aphrodite is what we'd consider the goddess of love and sexuality within the Greek pantheon. But one of the things I noticed with some of the things you've done in the past with I believe the water priestess confluence.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
you talked a little bit about some of the other things that you've done and the other I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but the other conference that you do with Anwin Avalon, who's also an amazing person. If you're new to the show, go check out that episode after you listen to this one. She's amazing. But
I
you
fully concur. She is amazing.
um, you both run these beautiful conferences, and one of the things that I saw that you did was talking about sacred sexuality. So let's talk a little bit about that because I feel like a lot of times, especially if you are somebody who's new to paganism and you're coming from more of a structured like Christian background, sacred sexuality or sexuality in general when it comes to the practice of witchcraft or the religion of witchcraft in itself is kind of almost taboo still. And
It is.
so let's talk about why it's not taboo and why it should be celebrated.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you've hit the nail on the head. Um, I feel like the remnants of the Satanic Panic are still with us in the 2020s now, right?
Yes.
Within the witchcraft community, we have not shaken that loose. And when I first started getting involved with paganism and magic, and this sort of spirituality, which was very different from what I was brought up in fact. It's probably relevant what I was brought up in because it might shed some light on where some of my own fears had been born within myself, right? So I came from a very missionary Baptist kind of background.
Girl,
My great
same.
yeah, it's yeah. In fact, like one of part of my family line, my mother's maiden name, going all the way back, like her family, our family was some of the first Baptists in on this continent. Like
Oh,
they were,
wow. Like old
yeah,
school.
old school Baptist, yeah. And I feel like there's just a lot of thou shalt nots within
Mm-hmm.
within that practice, like even more than are listed there in the Ten Commandments, right? Because
Yes.
um, you know, there's a lot of, I feel like thou shalt not dance, thou shalt not smile too loudly, thou shalt not teach Sunday school to adults if you're a woman. Like you can't, there's just so
Yeah.
many things you can't do, and that are framed around this that it would be immoral, it'd be unethical, and definitely enjoyment of the body, taking pleasure in our physical existence, and tapping into like really even acknowledging that there's power there. All of that does have this very sort of titillating and taboo feeling when you're coming from that sort of very puritanical background.
Mm-hmm.
um, and our country, here in the US, we're inundated with that. I mean, there's threads of that in every aspect of our culture. Um, Even if it's not the type of religion that people are practicing, we have this sort of push pull with anything that has to do with pleasure or beauty. We see these things as vain and as destructive, and that they're sort of the gateway drugs to the seven sins. um, and so I think that there is still this this fear around it. And it was really hyped up, I think, even more so during the height of the Satanic Panic,
Of
in the
course, yeah.
80s and 90s. Yeah, because they linked a lot of subversive ideas um, around Christianity and religion, things that people felt like were really just subversive and taboo. And then they linked it with like really lascivious images of sex, and really destructive images of drugs, and then just like personal violence and assault. They linked all these things together in our minds, whether they were true or not. Um, and it's been very challenging to sort of break away from that.
Absolutely.
So we're lucky there are a lot of authors that have actually shared some great work around these topics. But I feel like sometimes even then, like the way the marketing works for books, and as a fellow author, I know that you want to know what this is like. You have to
Mhm.
choose your cover carefully because you want it to stand out among the crowd, but you can't be too different.
Can't be too different. Can't be too, this. Can't be too that. And it's like, but you also are like, oh, but you have to make sure that it fits within the niche and it fits within that. And it's exhausting. If
It
you are,
is, yeah.
if you are an author, it is an exhausting thing to try to figure out the marketing and
Uh,
the designs and
yeah.
all this. Especially when all we want to do is just write the books. Like,
Right. I
don't
just want to
let
write the
us worry
books.
about the other crap. Like, just let us write.
Yeah.
But once you get that book out there, then it's like, oh, well, now I gotta market this thing. Do I know how to market? I don't know.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, that is a whole ball of yarn to unravel. But definitely like the almost anything having to do with sex, whether it's a self-help book, a relationship book, any of those kinds of things. Um, they the covers tend to be very sort of pushing that envelope, or sort of tickling that titillation button
Mm-hmm.
of oh, it's scandalous, but you got to find that way to still hook people in. But sometimes you're playing on, hey, this is scandalous and alternative. um, don't you want to know more? Um, for I don't know, folks that marketing really hits, right? Um, so yeah, we're not talking about it as much as we should, because sex and sexuality. I mean, these are um, kind of baked into the human construction,
Right.
and that they don't all work the same for all of us. They don't all look the same for all of us. They take more important roles in some of our lives than in others. I totally get that there's just a whole spectrum of nuance about it, but the fact that there is that spectrum and we're still just sort of not wanting to talk about it makes it really even harder to understand and to make sense of what's happening with us and our own brains and bodies. Because of course, sex very much happens in the brain
Oh,
as
yes,
well.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think there's
Um,
also a really great part when it comes to sex and sacred sexuality, especially when it comes to us as humans are religious and spiritual beings. Whether or not you
yeah.
believe in something is completely different. But obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you believe something. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're an
We seem to
atheist
be
listening to this
hardwired for it.
I still appreciate you, but I have questions. But that's not the point. But anyway, the fact that you were listening to this, and we are sexual beings, we are spiritual beings, but I think that there's this disconnect of wanting obviously that spiritual connection, but also understanding that with sex, that is also a spiritual act. It's not just a
Right.
physical and mental and emotional act, it is also spiritual. And it can, obviously be wonderful and great and all this stuff, but obviously we know that sometimes it can also be harmful. It can also be harmful spiritually as well if it's done incorrectly. And or if it's done with bad intentions, or any of those things. We won't go into the big details of that. But also understanding that it can be just as powerful and just as moving, and that energy can also be used in spell work and can be a
Right.
spell in itself and do all these wonderful things. So I think that having that, mentality of, oh, it's taboo and I shouldn't touch that, then the question truly becomes at the end of the day is why shouldn't you touch that?
Right.
So, I think that it's just a really great, thought process that as humans, especially especially here in America, we really need to ask ourselves, why is it still so taboo in 2024?
Right.
Why?
Right.
I mean, we all know about it, like we all celebrate it, we all have our moments with it, but why is it still so feared? And I think that's such a really great depth of a, topic, and a really great meditative topic as well. So, to work through that and to realize that, yeah, it can be so great. So, obviously, as somebody who has worked through many of these wonderful experiences and who has talked about it in many conferences and all these great things, what would kind of be your advice to somebody who is trying to break free from the confines of social and religious dogma in terms of the sacred sexuality?
Oh, um, so that's a big question.
That is a big question. If you need to break it down, that's totally fine too.
Yeah, I think so. I think two qualities that would really serve a person well to hold in their hearts for themselves, right? As they're even looking at this as a topic that they might consider exploring, and kind of hold them equally, right? Is
Hmm.
curiosity, and gentleness, right?
Oh,
To
those are
to be
good.
very
Yeah.
gentle with yourself, but curious about what's possible, curious about yourself. Um, and really that curiosity lets you be open, right? Curiosity says, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know why I feel this way. I don't know what's possible. So everything's possible. So let me explore. And then that gentleness, is needed. I think so many people have trauma around sex and
Hmm.
sexuality. And um, I think that gentleness would also, to me, it extends almost into like a caution, holding that caution for yourself as well, in the sense that I feel like there are more eyes on situations now than there have been in the past, but there's always concerns about predatory behavior
Of
anytime you're
course.
talking about sexuality. So, sort of starting from that place of curiosity and caution, curiosity and gentleness. There's lots of books that you can read and explore the topics theoretically and intellectually before you ever dip your toes
Oh,
or
absolutely.
fingers or whatever you're dipping.
Whatever it may be, whatever floats your boat, kind of thing. Um,
Yeah.
I think another really great topic that I would like to add to your gentleness and curiosity would be obviously the topic of consent
Yes.
and
Yeah.
understanding what consent is as a whole. Because I think a lot of times we don't realize what consent actually looks like
Right.
and what it can be. And sometimes it's very subtle, and other times it's very large and very boisterous and loud. And that's both are okay. But also understanding what that looks like, I think, is a really great thing for us to realize in today's world. That a lot of the things that should be considered consent were not considered as consent in years past. And so I think remembering that and what that looks like for you as an individual, and knowing that your consent also may not look the same as somebody else's, and respecting both is important, not just within you,
Right.
but also within somebody else is just as important. And having that kind of curiosity and understanding and gentleness with others is also important because, yes, sex can be a solo act, or it can be an act with another person, or it can be act with multiple people. It depends on what you're
Right.
into, and that's okay, whatever it may be. Um, but also remembering that if there's somebody else involved, it has to be, non predatory, it has to be consensual, it has to be, you know, as they like to say within BDSM, safe, sane, and consensual.
Safe, sane, and
Obviously,
consensual. Yep.
that's the best way to do it. So, the kind of understanding that, and that also applies to the magical aspects of sexuality, making sure that you're also following those lines. Can it aid you in spell work? Absolutely. Can it be a part of a really large ritual? Absolutely. But it also has to be safe, sane, and consensual. Always.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Always. And I will
always.
forever scream at the top of my lungs, consent is key. So don't come for me because I will just shut you down immediately. Consent is always key.
That's
So,
I fully agree. I fully agree. Yeah. In fact, when I'm doing intro to sacred sexuality talks, consent is usually the first thing that we address.
yes, yes,
Because and it gets hit in the middle, and followed up throughout, I think we end up really needing to, because there is sort of the stigma that magical sex or spiritual sex is, the larger community views that as a predatory thing in and of itself.
hmm
um, the fact that you're daring to mix the physical with the spiritual in such a such an intense way, that there are bells that get rung in people's heads. So it's even more important to make sure that you're minding your p's and q's,
yes,
and that you're taking every precaution, and making sure that you're not violating somebody else's consent. And also that you understand what you are consenting to and how you are expressing that consent, what your
yes.
boundaries are, and hold those as sacred.
And,
Um,
obviously, because I would like it to be said just for the record as well, consent can change throughout the middle of the act as well.
sure.
So, at any point in time, let's say that you're like, oh yeah, I'm totally down for this. And then somewhere along the way, it gets a little weird for you, even if it's in the middle of a ritual. I have stopped rituals in the middle before, and don't let anybody ever tell you, no, you can't do that. If it's not good for you, or it's not consensual for you, or it feels wrong, deity, spirit, whoever you are working with, your own energies will understand. And they want it to be good for you because if it's good for you, it's good for them. It's the same with us as human beings. If it's good for you and it's good for the other person, obviously it's going to be a great thing. But at any point in time, if it feels wrong or just doesn't feel right or feels uncomfortable, absolutely you can say, you know what? We need to take a pause. We need to figure out what's going on and why I feel this way and talk it out. If it can't be talked out, then consent is revoked. And that is
Absolutely.
absolutely okay. Don't let
Yeah.
anybody ever tell you otherwise because I'm not a nice person if you try to say otherwise. I am a wonderfully nice person outside of that, but you try to harm other people in that regard. Yeah, I'm not so nice.
Yeah, absolutely. No, nor should you be, right?
Right.
Uh, Actually, so it's interesting because I think there's a lot of overlap between the BDSM community and the sacred sexuality community. I think, um, there's a hearty chunk in the middle there of that Venn diagram, right?
Yes.
Um, but there are certainly people that are practicing sacred sexuality that are not into BDSM, and vice versa.
Yes.
But there's a good overlap there in the middle. And so there are a lot of practices from BDSM that have been brought into, sort of what I would consider, mainstream sacred sexuality practice,
Mhm.
including the use of safe words, and discussing boundaries before even getting started, like really sort of, con- you know, creating these contracts and setting these scenes before we get into it. Like there should not be surprises here necessarily. The surprise is how you feel, not
The
not what's
surprise should
being
be
done.
how you hit that O marker. But
Yeah.
if that's what
Yeah.
you're into, I mean, if you're doing the opposite of that, that's cool too. But
Yeah.
in terms of whatever it may be, yes, absolutely, I have seen that as well, and I think it's also kind of important to talk about how the aspect of if you are somebody that's like, hey, I get very that spiritual vibe if I'm participating in a BDSM scene, that might actually be a spiritual trigger for you.
Yeah.
And that's okay. As long as it follows the SSC. If it follows SSC, you're doing great. If you're, everybody's cool with it and you're having those kind of religious euphoric experiences while you're experiencing that, then yeah, you're doing great. You're doing exactly what sacred sexuality would be. And so I think that, having that kind of understanding that yes, this is okay as long as it's consensual and it's, everything it's supposed to be, then yes, experience it, enjoy it, learn it, the whole 9 yards. Go for it. I am a big fan. I will cheer you on from the sidelines. I don't need to watch, but I will cheer you on. So, and I think it's really cool too. And I've had many friends within the BDSM community who have invited deities into their scenes. Not so much because, they wanted to do an offering or anything like that. Just, they knew the deity would probably be into what they were doing and was like, hey, you can come watch if you want,
Right.
and that's okay. That's a part of it too. So there's so many different aspects that can be explored. And I think kind of what you were saying before with that gentleness and curiosity and obviously consent, those are the things that if you're going to be exploring these aspects, just remember those kind of key points and take your time. There's no rush, ever. You can go as quickly or as slow as you want to, but remember, there's no real reason why you should feel guilty about your sexuality and who you are and what you enjoy, as long as you're not harming somebody in the process.
Right.
So, harming somebody non-consensually.
Right.
Because there is such thing as pain play. So,
Right.
there is that.
The
But yeah,
difference between hurt and harm. Yeah.
yes, hurt and harm. There are two different things. Yes,
Yep.
absolutely. So kind of segueing a little bit about that. Obviously, you have so many great books out, but you also have something that's called the Red Thread Academy. Do you want to kind of talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the Red Thread Academy is the witchcraft school that I run. And it really is, it's accessible primarily, well, I won't even say primarily. There are 3 course manuals, one for each. We'll call it a year of study. The lessons are set up so that you can complete them in a year, but I'm going to go ahead and just let you know right now. I know that that's a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
um, People's lives are busy, and I was not willing to cut back on what our craft tradition teaches. So, and that's essentially what this is it's the 3 degrees of the witchcraft tradition that I run, that are accessible to people to read and pursue either totally independently, or we've got a Discord server where people all across the world are talking about their experiences with these lessons and the process and the spirits that are involved. Um, and even theoretically, like not just theoretically, the home coven here, where I live, is functional and operational, and is in place. There are going to be, I already know, there are going to be other covens, um, um, of initiated witches within this witchcraft tradition that's being, um, sort of presented in these books, where people can participate in person as well. So it's it's really just a way to transmit a specific, folkloric American tradition of witchcraft in a way that is not limited by your accessibility to me in Northern Kentucky. Because I I actually started working on this a little bit before the pandemic had started, because my
Mm-hmm.
coven is pretty scattered. Now, we started all in sort of the Indianapolis area, and then I moved, and others have moved, and so we mostly interact with each other online. And I wanted to make sure that there was a way for everybody to have access to the same teachings in a consistent way, and that includes the rituals that we do and the ways that we incorporate, sort of experimentation and creativity into our ritual work, the big lessons within what we do. And it's a mystery tradition,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that there are those sort of ineffable things that we know that we're seeking, and there's some guideposts in the books as well for that. So, um, the way a person gets started with it is you can either download a PDF copy from my website or from my Etsy shop, because I have both, um, or you can buy physical copies of the books from Amazon, and then there's a QR code inside to be able to start getting you into the Discord server. There's a little bit of a process. We want to make sure you actually have the materials and are interested in this, is that we try to keep it quite a closed server so that people feel safer in sharing.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely wonderful. And yeah, I think that the pandemic actually created a lot of um like online covens because that's how mine is. Mine
Hmm.
is obviously spread out across, the country, and we have a member who is actually in England as well. So
Oh, wow. Yeah.
yeah, I think that that's a wonderful kind of thing that we have now that we didn't have before, where it's like, oh well, you have to find your community locally, and sometimes that's very difficult. Now we have the internet, and the internet has
Right.
made it possible for us to still have magic elsewhere.
Oh, and it's amazing. I've done so not through this tradition, but through another magical order. I don't know how familiar you are with magical orders and
Hmm.
that type of thing. So there's a wonderful, wonderful person that I met through the OTO, when she and I were both participating with the OTO, and since that time, actually maybe even before that time, she had sort of created a women's based magical tradition.
Yeah.
It's open to people of any gender, but you have to agree to be a sorer. You're going to be a sister. um, and we sort of explore this sort of realm of women's magic and women's power, and sort of those hermetic mysteries from that perspective. And we did all of our, I've gone through the initiation cycle, and we did all of ours, we did an online cycle.
Hmm.
And so all of us were joining on Zoom, and it's amazing the way that you can still feel everybody's energy through this technology, that it really does. Um, there's the energy is not necessary. It's different maybe, but it's not in any way diminished,
No.
to be able to do magic together and experience initiation in this, sort of tech facing way. It's mind blowing and really cool, and opens up so many possibilities for people.
I think it is a really cool thing, and obviously we do that as well. We do ours through Discord.
Hmm.
And so, it's such a fun experience to see. And also when you don't see somebody in person, and you're just in, a voice call with them, and you're doing this magic, and obviously you're connecting and doing the things. When you can't see them physically, and you get to hear their physical responses to what's happening, and it's just the coolest experience because you're just like, wow, it worked, it did the thing, and you just get that really
Yeah.
fun excitement that goes with it. Especially when we first got started. Now we've been doing this for, god, like 2.5 years.
Hmm.
So like I'm actually closer to 3 years now. But when you kind of get those processes going and everything, it's really exciting to see how that works out. So I'd also say to anybody who's new to the show, if you're looking for a community or those kinds of things, um, don't limit yourselves to having to do it in person. Obviously, that in person is wonderful, but if you live in a rural community or a place where it's not super magically inclined, obviously check out some of the online communities and see what you can find, because you might find your people that way. So
Yeah,
good stuff.
absolutely.
So obviously you have so many great things. You also do various services as well. You have, I believe, tarot readings, if I remember correctly. Is that correct?
I do. Yeah, I offer some tarot readings. It's not, I will not say that at this time in my life that's not the bread and butter of what I do,
That's fair.
but it's there and it's available if somebody's wanting a reading with me. I read more than I read lots of different types of divinatory tools, so shells and lots of different cards, including tarot. Um, and pendulums and scrying and all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of options there if somebody's wanting to even just see how a different reading might work.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I do some coaching and that type of thing if a person's interested in having like a mentor or a guide,
Oh,
to help
lovely.
them work
Yeah,
through their magical path. I'm here for that.
I love that. That's so great. So obviously you have all these wonderful books out, you have these wonderful classes, and wonderful things that you're doing. Do you have any new books or new projects or new events coming up that you'd like to really discuss and talk about?
Oh, so I am getting ready to release. It should be ready. soon. I don't have a date.
That's
We'll
okay.
say, we'll say, but I think very, very soon, like in June of this year, I should be able to have that book available. It's actually a pagan festival planning guide.
Oh, lovely.
So because I have been running events I've been running events since I was in college. That was in the 90s. So I've been running pagan events since I was in college. So and I've just sort of gotten deeper and deeper into the world of camping festivals around pagan themes and online events, like the two that I run with Anwin, Avalon. That you mentioned one of them earlier, which
Hmm.
was the Water Priestess Confluence. The other one is the Bewitching the Waters
Bewitching the
Symposium.
Waters. That's the one.
Yeah.
I was like, I know I'm forgetting it, but I didn't have it pulled up in front of me. That's why.
Oh no, you're
I'm
fine.
lucky that I remember my name some days. So.
Agreed. Very much agreed. And then I'm also a retreat host, so I quite enjoy that for in-person spaces, sort of small groups of 10 to 30, sort of not going over that 30-35 limit, and really being able to dig deep into a topic over the course of a weekend and give ourselves space to feel all the things and experience all the things that we are wanting to get out of that. So I decided, how am I going to transmit some of this? I don't even know if anybody wants me to transmit it. This is one of those things going back to the marketing. Like, I just want to write what I like to write. Maybe nobody will ever buy it, but maybe it will. Maybe it'll help a couple of people out there. I have some friends that I intend to give it away to that are, within festival planning spaces that are sort of just getting started. And I think that it broaches lots of the logistical things of how do you help organize pagan space.
Hmm.
Not really coven space or that type of space, but sort of focused, we're going to spend 3 days to a week together. What does that look like? How do we make that happen?
I think that sounds absolutely wonderful and definitely a necessary tool for a lot of people who don't know how to plan these types of events, but obviously want to plan one. Maybe
Yeah,
it's local for their community, maybe it's a online thing, whatever it may be, having that ability to reach out into the community is a really great way. So I think that's cool. Everyone who obviously I'm just assuming it's going to be on your website.
it will.
So I will make sure your website link is in the show description as always, and I will have many of your books listed as well because we should always promote all the good stuff. And if I can fit them all, I'll have them all. If not, I will have a link to your author page on Amazon so that way people can go and get all the copies of those books because unfortunately with show descriptions I have a character limit. So
Right.
I'm gonna try to fit them all if I can. Now, are you on social media where people can follow you?
Actually, I have just left social media.
Oh,
Like,
fair.
I made a post about a few days ago, and I've been off for 2 solid weeks now, and it's amazing. So my my accounts are still there. So if people want to go and find me, it's usually my name is the way to get there, Laurelei Black. And uh, there's I can't even say there's only one of me. There's another Laurelei Black, but she spells her name differently. um, and she's not necessarily in pagan space, right?
Hmm.
So, but yeah, Laurelei Black is a good way to find me. I have accounts on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, but I'm no longer there in those spaces. But the last post that I posted on each of those tells folks how to get in touch with me.
Okay, cool. I will include them, but obviously, if you're really trying to probably reach Lorelai, probably going through the website would probably be the best way.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Yep,
Okay.
the website is the best way.
So that's probably going to be the best way if you have questions or are more interested in obviously the classes and the Red Thread Academy and all those things. Everything will be listed through the website, which will be great. So yeah, Lorelai, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming by.
Thank you so much, Pagan, for having me. I This has been a delightful conversation, and I would love to do it again sometime
We
if
will
there are other
definitely do it
topics.
again.
Yeah.
I got plans for you. I got plans for you. We're gonna talk
Yay.
about them. But for everybody who's been listening, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you're new to the show, thank you for subscribing, obviously, and listening to it. We really appreciate all that you do here, especially all the authors. who come through and get to talk about their books and their practice and get to just bring new insight to the show every week, or I'm sorry, every 2 weeks now. And so it's just a wonderful experience. So everyone, make sure you're taking care of yourselves, be kind to each other, and I will see you all next time. So bye, everyone.